Okay, let's dive right in.
Yeah.
It's absolutely everywhere in our lives, sometimes quite literally.
Mm-hmm.
That morning coffee, the afternoon tea, maybe an energy drink. It's caffeine,
Yeah, coffee, tea, green tea even, those energy drinks, chocolate too.
even medicines
Yeah.
sometimes. And most of us, we just drink it, right?
Yeah.
Without really thinking deeply beyond, okay, I need to wake up.
Exactly. But, the sources you've brought together show there's actually a surprising amount going on with caffeine. It's much more complex than just a simple pick-me-up.
And that's precisely what this deep dive is all about. We're looking at these sources on caffeine,
Yeah.
how it works, the real upsides, the potential downsides, and importantly, how you can use it wisely.
Trying to get past the surface level stuff and find out what's really useful.
Right. So to really get it, we have to start at the beginning, based on the material. What is caffeine, fundamentally?
Okay, so the basics. It's a natural chemical. It's found in plants, coffee beans, obviously, tea leaves, cocoa beans are the big ones.
And it's bitter, apparently. The sources mention that, and that it acts as a defense for the plant.
Yeah, kind of like a natural bug repellent, which is pretty interesting. But for us, its main job is as a central nervous system stimulant.
Okay, stimulant. How does it actually do that? The sources get into the mechanism, right?
They do, and it's fascinating. So once you consume it, it gets into your bloodstream, travels up to your brain.
Right.
And the key thing, the reason it wakes you up, is it blocks a substance called adenosine.
Adenosine, what's that normally do?
Well, think of adenosine as your body's natural get sleepy signal. It's a neurotransmitter, and it builds up all day while you're awake.
Uh-huh.
And it attaches to receptors in your brain, basically telling your system, okay, time to slow down, time for rest. It helps regulate when you feel tired.
Okay. So caffeine comes along and it kicks adenosine out.
Pretty much. It's similar enough in shape that it can slot into those same receptors.
But it doesn't activate them.
Exactly. It just blocks them. So the adenosine that's floating around can't dock, can't deliver its sleepy message.
So the I'm tired signal gets muted.
That's it. That's why you feel less fatigued, more alert. But crucially, it's not creating energy. It's just temporarily stopping your brain from realizing how tired it might actually be.
That makes a huge difference in understanding it. It's not magic fuel, it's biochemistry.
And knowing that helps understand both the benefits and the limits.
Okay, speaking of benefits, let's talk about the upsides. When is caffeine actually helpful, according to these sources?
Well, the big one, the reason most people use it is for focus and alertness.
Right.
That feeling the sources mention, like being sharper, clearer before a big meeting or when you really need to buckle down and study.
Yeah, cutting through that mental fog. And related to that is using it to fight off temporary sleepiness,
Right.
when you just have to stay awake.
Exactly. Like the examples given, needing to stay focused on a long drive maybe, or pulling a late night to finish a project. Caffeine can definitely help reduce that feeling of being tired just to get you through those specific times. But again, it's managing the feeling, not eliminating your actual need for sleep.
That's such an important point to keep making. Okay, another benefit mentioned is physical performance.
Yeah, there's good evidence presented for this. It seems caffeine can boost your exercise capacity.
How so?
It helps reduce the feeling of fatigue during exercise and can increase endurance. That's why, some athletes use it strategically for things like marathons or intense gym sessions.
Gives you that little edge.
Okay.
And then there are maybe some more surprising potential long-term benefits, but linked to moderate use.
This is where the research gets quite interesting. The sources cite studies suggesting that regular, moderate caffeine intake might be associated with a lower risk for certain diseases.
Like what?
Specifically, things like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's type dementia, and even type 2 diabetes are mentioned.
Wow. Okay, that's definitely different from just the immediate alertness factor. It suggests something more complex happening over time.
Mm-hmm.
But the key word there is moderate, yes.
Absolutely critical. The sources stress that these potential associations are linked to appropriate consumption levels, not overdoing it.
Which, naturally, leads us to the other side of the coin. When does caffeine stop being helpful and start causing problems? What are the downsides the sources highlight?
Well, the most common issues stem from just having too much caffeine. Overconsumption.
Yeah.
That can lead to a whole bunch of not so great effects. Difficulty sleeping is a big one, insomnia. Basically, caffeine is still blocking adenosine when you actually want it to make you sleepy.
Yeah, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, brain buzzing.
Exactly. You might also feel more anxious or restless, kind of jittery. And for some people, too much can even trigger heart palpitations, that feeling of your heart fluttering or racing.
That sounds uncomfortable, and it's not just about having too much at once, is it? There's dependency, too.
Yes, the sources definitely cover dependency and withdrawal. If you drink a lot of caffeine regularly, every day, your body
That
adapts.
gets used to it.
It does.
Hmm.
And then if you suddenly stop or cut way back, you can get withdrawal symptoms.
Which are?
The classic ones are headaches, feeling really fatigued, or just generally unwell malaise and having trouble concentrating. Your body is basically reacting to that caffeine block suddenly being removed.
Oof. Okay. Are there specific groups who need to be more careful?
Yes, the sources are quite clear on this, especially pregnant individuals.
This seems really important. Why is that?
Because caffeine crosses the placenta and reaches the fetus.
Mm-hmm.
So the recommendation highlighted is to limit intake to no more than 200 milligrams per day during pregnancy.
Which is rough.
About 1 to 2 average cups of coffee, give or take.
Good to know. Any other groups?
Children and the elderly are also mentioned as potentially being more sensitive. Their bodies might process caffeine differently, or they might feel the stimulating effects, like on heart rate or anxiety, more strongly.
Okay. And finally, just general physical discomforts.
Yeah, a couple of things. Drinking coffee, especially black coffee, on an empty stomach can irritate the stomach lining for some people, causes that acidic, uneasy feeling.
Mm.
And caffeine is also a diuretic. It makes you need to urinate more often. The sources note this could potentially lead to dehydration if you're not careful about drinking enough other fluids like water.
Right. So it's definitely a substance with two sides. How do we use this info then to sort of manage our relationship with caffeine better? What are the practical tips?
It really boils down to being mindful and strategic about it. The first tip from the sources is know your limit.
Okay.
For most healthy adults, the general guideline is up to 400 milligrams a day. That's around 3 or 4 cups of coffee, typically.
But that's just a guideline, isn't it? The sources stress individuality.
Hugely important, yes. You have to pay attention to how your body responds. What feels fine for one person might make someone else feel awful. It takes some self-awareness.
Right. And timing matters too, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This relates back to how long caffeine hangs around in your system.
How long is that usually?
The sources say the effects can last 4 to 6 hours, sometimes even longer for some people.
Wow.
Which is why the advice is generally to avoid it later in the day. Maybe set a cutoff, like say 3 p.m., so it doesn't mess with your sleep later that night.
Protect that sleep schedule.
Yeah.
Okay. What about taking breaks?
Yeah, that's another suggestion. Having caffeine-free days, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, can help stop your body building up a tolerance.
Tolerance meaning you need more and more to get the same effect.
Exactly. And needing more increases the risk of those negative side effects. So taking a break helps reset your sensitivity, lets those adenosine receptors, have a rest.
A little vacation for the receptors. Got it. And the final point seemed to be about using it strategically.
Right. Use it like a tool, not just out of pure habit. The sources give examples of smart timing.
Like when?
Maybe after lunch to fight off that afternoon slump. Or before something demanding concentration, like a big presentation or an exam. Or, if you need to drive a long distance or work an early shift where alertness is really key for safety or just getting the job done.
So being intentional about why and when you're having it.
Precisely. And if you just like the ritual, say, of a warm drink in the evening, the sources remind us there are always low caffeine or decaf options.
Which actually brings us to some of those perhaps lesser-known facts about caffeine.
Yeah, some surprising details came up in the materials.
Okay, let's hear them. What did the sources uncover that might surprise people?
Well, one thing is about decaf coffee. Lots of people think decaf means 0 caffeine.
It doesn't.
Not usually, no. The sources clarify it typically means 90% or more of the caffeine has been removed. But small amounts can still be left, so it's rarely completely caffeine-free.
Huh. That's good to know, especially if you're really sensitive.
Could make a difference, yeah. Another surprise might be about tea. Coffee often gets the reputation for being the highest in caffeine.
Right.
But the sources point out that some teas, like certain green teas or oolong teas, depending on the type and how long you brew them, can actually have as much or sometimes even more caffeine than black tea or even some coffees.
Really? I always thought green tea was way lower. That changes things.
Yeah, the variation can be significant. And caffeine isn't just in drinks, remember?
Oh, yes, chocolate.
Especially dark chocolate because
Yeah.
of the cocoa content. So that's another source to be aware of, maybe not right before bed if you're sensitive.
Good point. Any other hidden sources?
One that might surprise many, some headache medications.
Headache pills. Why on earth would caffeine be in those?
It actually makes sense physiologically. The sources explain that caffeine can cause blood vessels to constrict, to narrow slightly, and some types of headaches, like tension headaches, are thought to involve dilated or widened blood vessels. So caffeine's ability to constrict them can actually help relieve the pain in those cases.
So it's being used for a specific physical effect. That's fascinating.
It really shows how complex this one molecule is and the different ways it interacts with our bodies.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these different threads together. What's the main takeaway from this whole deep dive into caffeine?
I think the core message, repeated across the sources, really comes down to balance and self-awareness. Caffeine is presented as a potentially really useful tool, an ally even,
Yeah.
but only when you use it thoughtfully and in moderation.
It really can improve things like concentration, getting through temporary tiredness, maybe even physical performance if you use it smartly.
But that smart partnership is key. It means you, the listener, really need to pay attention to how your own body reacts. Be clear about why you're using it and be really mindful about the timing.
So less mindless consumption, more intentional use, treating it with a bit of respect for its effects, both good and bad.
Exactly. That mindful approach lets you get the benefits while hopefully minimizing those potential downsides.
You know, this whole discussion about caffeine really highlights how differently we all react to something so common. Given that, what does it suggest about maybe paying closer attention to how other everyday things, foods, drinks, maybe even our environment, affect each of us uniquely? Seems like that self-awareness is a pretty powerful tool on its own.